This is Today with Ann Curry, Natalie Morales, and Hoda Kotb. Live from Studio 1A in Rockefeller Plaza.
A lot of women in midlife, or some women I should say in midlife, are having eating disorders, and that's something I was unaware of, but we're going to talk about that happening later in life. Still to come, the secret battle some middle-aged women are fighting, but first these messages.
When you think of eating disorders, teenage girls probably come to mind, but a new study confirms more middle-aged women are actually seeking treatment for their own secret battles with the problem. Tamara Pryor is a psychologist with the Eating Disorder Center of Denver and is the author of the study. And Gail Schoenbach first sought treatment for bulimia when she was 38 years old. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
So Gail, this was a study you did at the center, at the Eating Disorder Center of Denver, and you found that more women between the ages of 30 to 58 are seeking treatment for eating disorders. How big a problem would you say this is?
You know, we had heard about it in the field of eating disorders, so the study that we did at the Eating Disorder Center of Denver was basically to see if we could actually find data to support that. I think for the last 5, 6, 7 years we've known this in various centers across the United States that the average age of individuals seeking treatment was going up. But we simply needed to know if these people are out there and there's larger and larger numbers of midlife women struggling, then what do we need to understand about them in order to know how to effectively treat them?
And if you are somebody who had an eating disorder when you were younger, in your teens, you found that 94% generally had some sort of relapse or were not fully recovered?
This is what we didn't really know going into the study, whether or not we were going to find that there was a new subgroup of eating disorders of women in their midlife waking up and discovering that they were struggling with an eating disorder, because that's what the information that was out there that was being presented looked like. It was midlife women starting eating disorders, but what we found is that 94% of them indeed had an eating disorder at an earlier age, and they either relapsed or they had a chronic course of the eating disorder and were just seeking treatment for the first time.
And Gail, I mean, you had struggled, as I understand, with an eating disorder since your teens, so
Right.
I think something like 24 years
Right.
you lived with bulimia, purging even in front of your kids, as I understand.
Yes.
When you finally sought treatment was when you were in your late 30s.
Right.
Why did all of a sudden that become an issue for you? You realized, I really have a problem.
Well, it was brought to my attention that I needed to, really for the first time, and I was sort of backed into a corner, I guess, and it was time. You know, I was ready, and being ready made it easy enough to go in and get treatment. And it was recommended that I go inpatient, and I wouldn't, and I started an outpatient program for a year before I went inpatient for 2 months.
So you were in denial.
Oh, my whole life. It was going to go away. It was just going to go away, and I wasn't going to have to worry about doing anything about it.
But your husband knew, people around you.
People knew, and it was, we talked about it sometimes, but there was a lot of denial, and it was working for me. I didn't look sick for the most part, most of the time. I was very high functioning, and
you managed to have 3 pregnancies.
Yes.
Usually there's complications with
have
eating
any.
disorders.
I was
You
very
had none of
lucky.
that. It can be physically devastating, so you had none of the physical issues that go along with it. And Dr. Pryor, how typical is Gail then? A story like hers where, you know, really it comes to having somebody else make you aware that you've got a real serious problem here.
I think that
and that she was in denial.
I think that piece is typical, that women in midlife, because these are very high-functioning individuals in other areas of their life, that they're living with a lot of shame. This is a secretive disorder, so they overcompensate in terms of their ability to be able to function well in other areas of their life. And so it isn't unusual that we would hear that someone had to finally confront them, finally force them to take a look at what was going on and the devastating effects that this illness was actually having, whether it be in their relationships with their loved ones or on the job, or beginning to take its toll in terms of the physical consequences of the illness.
What are some of the personality traits of someone who might end up with an eating disorder? You mentioned Gail was an example of someone who's very high functioning in other areas of her life. Usually I think there's a tendency to say that they tend to be type A people who are very, you know, perfectionists. Things have to be under their control. What do you see in most of the patients that you've dealt with who've had eating disorders?
Well, that was an interesting piece of the study, is that we compared individuals with eating disorders under 30 to those over 30 and looked at their temperament and character presentation, and we found that there was more similarities than difference. In fact, the over 30 and the under 30 were exactly the same. And some of the outstanding characteristics that we now know through the genetic research as well as our research is the tendency to be rather harm avoidant, rather shy, very perfectionistic, very driven. They tend to be rather anxious, kind of worrisome people. They want to get things right. They don't like to make mistakes, do things wrong. So certainly if there's things that they're not comfortable with in terms of their internal experience, they're going to try to fix the external.
So are there some contributing causes then? I know, Gail, in your case that you were dieting a lot.
It started as a diet.
It started as a diet.
Yes.
Is that something that you typically see as well, that there's either something happens in your personal life or whether it's just a general pattern of dieting all the time that you're going through?
We found three particular contributors, and it was in the younger group as well as older, and so there weren't any significant differences there. And the first one was early dieting, as Gail's described. The second one was emotional, physical, or sexual trauma as a precipitating event. And then the third was grief and loss. And so these were definite events that contributed to the onset of the illness, regardless of the age of onset.
Aging is a big one when you get older.
And hitting the 30s and 40s.
Having to be okay with that and look a certain way and preserve yourself.
And you're recovered now,
Yes,
Gail? You're
I
doing
am.
well? 6 years now? No issues with bulimia?
No, and I keep intact by really just trying to help other people.
Well, I know that you're doing that, being here today and sharing your story with us. So thank you for being here, Gail Schoenbach and Tamara Pryor. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank
Great
you.
information.